Drilling fluids touch just about everything in the drilling process. We're here to deconstruct the drilling process and drilling fluid concepts to provide a deeper understanding of our industry. In each episode, we'll share information, talk to interesting people, and maybe share a few stories along the way. Welcome to the Flowline, a production of AES Drilling Fluids, brought to you by Matt Offenbacher and Justin Gauthier.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Flowline. Here we are again behind the mic, excited to get going. Myself and Matt Offenbacher. For those listening on a podcast, whichever podcast platform you listen to, we also are putting these on YouTube now. So just wanted to let everybody know we've got the video. That sort of the video podcast thing is important, and so yeah, we're transitioning, or I never say transitioning, more of like adding the video to it. Matt, and what are your thoughts around the whole video situation? Are you excited, nervous? Tell me.
Mostly in some ways, I'm like, well, I talk with my hands, and there have been a few times where I've been like, well, you can't see this, so never mind.
Yeah.
So like, there's that aspect where I'm like, okay, that's good. The other part of it is more self-conscious about like,
what do I wear? It takes you an hour in the morning to get ready, and you're like, oh my gosh.
Exactly. No, it's just like, okay, what do I look weird? What about it?
Yeah.
Careful. So I guess there's certainly like the self-conscious aspect, but hopefully adds a, more human side to what we do. And this is another one where you can thank AI, because there are some really great tools that will automatically edit everything. So,
Right.
We have day jobs, so we enjoy doing this. We think not only is it just a good thing to do, but it's also good for our company. And if we had to invest a lot in video editing and that sort of thing, it really wouldn't be economical. But thankfully, there are some new tools out that will sort of do that for us and do a pretty good job, which means we can just offer more without requiring a lot more.
Yeah.
So we can keep doing it.
Yeah, no, that's true. I listen to a lot of podcasts, and if I get a chance to actually watch, it's like I'm not going to sit there and for 3 hours or an hour just sit and watch a podcast, but sometimes it's nice to have it as a background, and even just kind of watching facial expressions, how they interact. So a lot of times it kind of sinks in a little better. So yeah, it's kind of another step towards just keeping up with the times, and a big shout out to the marketing team, because they're the ones putting in the work. So yeah, and again, any feedback. We kind of always talk about, if you have any suggestions, this and that, but any feedback for the show, maybe not even on the content, just the quality, the sound, anything like that. If anyone's been listening for a while and they're like, I wish they would really do this, let us know. Because we kind of
Fashion advice, now that there's an opportunity to see us.
Right. Yeah, you can vote. I mean, whatever. But with that being said, Matt, again, it has been so long, and I meant to bring this up the other day, but Bregman has left the Astros. I'm sure there's been lots happening over the last, I don't know how long it's been since we've talked about it, but what's going on in the Astros world real quick?
I mean, it's wild, right? So big changes. I mean, there's actually this really sad picture of like all of the young guys like celebrating after a game, and they like fade away as like George Springer left and Correa and all that. And then Altuve is just out there by himself.
Oh.
Anyways, I think it was very unlikely that Bregman was coming back. They made him an offer. He, look, I don't know what was in his head, but he may have wanted to leave. He may have wanted more money, what have you. Like, it is what it is. But they signed a third baseman, or they traded Kyle Tucker, so another great talent moving away, and got a third baseman, signed a first baseman. So, and then then Altuve in spring training has been doing nothing but playing left field, which is weird. So, and they just gave a spring training invite to another second baseman. So, I think they're trying to beef up the defense as Altuve kind of ages and that sort of thing. But it's going to look very different. Not to say they didn't bring on some great talent. Christian Walker at first base, I'm very excited about that. He's just a good fundamentals guy, good hitter. So like a lot going on. And then, you got Bregman leaving, and, there was a question of what we would even do if we already had a high level third baseman and a high level prospect third baseman in the wings. what would you do if he signed it? Like, would he move to second base? All those kinds of questions. Well, now that he's at the Boston Red Sox, guess what? They already had a third baseman.
Right.
And so there's a question of what he's going to do. And a couple of his new teammates have been pretty vocal about how they don't think he should play third base. And I'm not quite sure.
Dang.
Yeah. So I mean,
That's crazy.
yeah, it's a little weird to hear these interviews where it's like, no, we have a third baseman. We don't need him. And so they'll figure that out. But if they live in chaos over on the East Coast, that's not really my problem.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, you're focused more at home here. How's the pitching lineup looking? Is that?
I mean, it's coming together. So, I mean, I think we've, it's hard to say. Like spring training. So the story behind spring training is everybody shows up and then like so and so is working on a new pitch, and they try like one time in spring training and get rocked, and then they never use it again.
Okay.
But like I'm really excited to see what Spencer Arrighetti does this year. I think he's just like, on the way up.
Cool.
I mean, it's just so pitching, and then we got guys coming back from injuries like Lance McCullers. It's gonna take him a little bit longer, but seeing his like Instagram and seeing his stuff looks really good. And he's part owner of a coffee shop at my house, and I saw him the other day.
No way.
And he, I try not to be weird around famous people, right? And so like, I said, oh, we're going to see you, I said something about, are we going to see, Astros Fan Fest was that day where the fans get to go to the stadium and they have like, I bring my kids because like bounce houses and stuff.
Heck yeah.
But I asked him if we'd see him there, and he was like, no, I got a bullpen. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. And like, but he, I was like, well, your form's looking really good, whatever. So he said to change all his mechanics to, address the injuries he's had.
Jeez.
But
that's wild.
I mean, if anybody's going to do it, that guy's a dog. He's a fighter.
Yeah.
So I'm really pulling for him.
Cool.
So
no, that's exciting. And when does the season kick off again? Is it August?
Very into May. I believe May 30th.
Okay. Oh, right. No, October's playoffs, so August would make no sense.
Yeah.
Anyways, well, it's coming around the corner then.
Yeah.
Holy smokes. Well, it'll be, for those interested in the Astros, you'll be hearing the weekly update. If you've listened for a while, Matt's usually pretty dialed in, not only with Mud, but Astros as well. So I think everyone out there should encourage Matt to start an Astros podcast. I think he would crush. And so anyway, now that you're watching, just like, I mean, look at the guy. He's a sports broadcast Astro connoisseur. He's got the suit, which you can't see, but he wears it on game day and big events. So anyway, I'm glad you got the update, and now I know what to watch out for in May, not August, because I'd have been sitting waiting a long time. But nonetheless, let's move on to drilling fluids. I'm sure folks are wondering what we're going to talk about today. And Matt, when it comes to drilling fluids, obviously density is a big component, right? But assuming we've decided, what mud weight we're going to drill with, it's important to understand if you're going to drill with something that's fairly light, what kind of options are out there. So today's topic is we're going to talk about just getting light.
Yeah. How low can you go?
How low can you go? How low can you go? How low can you go, Matt?
Well, it depends on your fluid choices, which we'll run through here shortly.
Okay. So let's actually sort of explain, why would you want to get extremely light?
One of the primary reasons we normally run into, and this is part of the trap, right? So you say, I want to get really light because I want to avoid losses. A lot of times you may be drilling in a really depleted area, and, so you're not it may not be very any pressurized anymore. So the area's been producing for a long time. So now you're talking about you're probably in like a cheaper drilling environment. And of course, all these fluids have a cost, which is why you don't use them all the time. So the tension is always like, how low can I go economically if you're trying to avoid losses? Because if you lose it, that's money you're pumping away, right?
Of course.
So one reason is to avoid losses. The other one is in certain areas, I mean, very low mud weight, if you don't have any pore pressure you have to hold back, you can drill really fast. This is where, I mean, without jumping too far ahead, like this is a reason where you can drill on air. People do it, is drill really, really fast.
Yep.
So there's a few different ways to do this, and there's always a question like, well, how light could I actually get? And so I just tried to put together a few mud systems and characterize how light you could get, but things you got to think about if you're going to go that low.
Perfect. Well, when it comes to being extremely light, the first thing I would think of is an all oil mud. So let's start on that.
Yes, and an all-oil mud, I think we did go into some detail on an episode many moons ago
Hmm.
on the components of an all-oil system. But in essence, the argument being 100% oil, you would be as light as the base oil could be. So like with a synthetic base oil, you could be 6.5, 6.7 pounds per gallon, somewhere in that neighborhood.
Yeah.
Pretty darn light. But if we're being honest, usually because there is water in the formation and things you're drilling into, you've got to do something with that water. So in all likelihood, you're not 100% oil, you're like a 98.2 or a 96.4. And so you run it just like a very high oil content, oil-based mud. But with that, with mostly oil comes challenges like viscosity. And, if you are trying to limit fluid invasion, I mean, base oil is very, very thin. So um, it's not just that it requires some additives, it's that it requires a lot of whatever you're adding in. So, for example, adding in our organophilic clay, sure, but you've actually got to find a way to activate it, which, like a polar activator or something like that. So it requires higher concentrations of products, special tips and tricks. You may need to worry about the flash point if you got an all oil system, which is different than what a oil-based mud emulsion would be. Um, and then this is going to be true of all of these, but managing your solids to keep your mud weight down. So you say, oh, well, I can get a nominal mud weight of 6.7. Well, what happens if I got 3% low gravs, right? Like that acts as weight material and it takes you the other direction fairly quickly. And dilution is expensive, blah, 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 right? So you already can sense there's a lot of push and pull here.
So, when it comes to an all oil mud, though, are you typically treating that the same way you would an oil based mud? You got your emulsifiers and everything else.
So yes, because of the presence of water, you will likely have an emulsifier in there, even if you're like not trying to let any brine in the internal phase.
Gotcha.
You will definitely have an oil wetting agent because since this is an oil continuous system, you want to oil wet any solids that go in there. So yeah, it's gonna look like you're gonna use a lot of conventional products, and then when you get to viscosifiers and that sort of thing, you'll need a couple of extra goodies.
Gotcha. Okay. Let's go over to the one that's near and dear to our heart, especially in the Permian, is the direct emulsion.
Yes. So the direct emulsion. Uh, so the origins of direct emulsions before you were using them to drill salt sections, basically make saturated brine appear lighter to a lower formation,
Mhm.
was just to get fresh water lighter. So let's say you start a freshwater base fluid, 8.33 pounds per gallon or whatever. Um, and now I disperse some oil in it. So direct emulsion, oil droplets dispersed in a water continuous system. You could probably, I mean, it'll get thick eventually, but you could probably get 8 pounds per gallon, maybe a little bit lighter. Um, the challenge here is, um, really, once again, fighting the mud weight solids, trying to keep solids under control, and just you put a bunch of base oil in this, you're trying not to lose it. And most of the time, direct emulsions, were sort of looked at, tried, and walked away from for these applications was if I'm going to start losing mud, I may as well just pump water away. I couldn't get light enough, didn't matter. And so unless you knew exactly what your fracture gradient was and you knew you could stay below it by using a direct emulsion, they would fall out of favor. But there are places where they're worth looking into. If you're trying to stay, below 8.3 or something, accounting for solids and that sort of thing. So, yeah.
Okay. I mean, that's pretty straightforward. What about if you're going to introduce something mechanical to help lighten the fluid?
Yes. Well, so the interesting thing is, there's there are these hollow glass spheres. They've been used, but they are a glass sphere that has gas inside of them, right? So they are a fluid additive that essentially provide empty space so that your density gets lighter. And some of the literature of when these things have been designed, you can get them down to 7 pounds per gallon. Uh, and that's in a water-based mud. You could probably try this, or I'm sure you could use it in an oil-based mud and get, you know, below 6 pounds per gallon, would be my suspicion. How that fluid looks is another question, but these spheres are going to act as solids. This is sort of like trying to deal with drill beads or something, right? Um, and so, how are you going to keep them in the system? And how are you going to make sure they don't all get crushed or broken down by drilling processes? Are some of the questions. So,
Sure.
this can get expensive. Um, the there's going to be some implications for fluid properties, but I know for some oil-based mud applications, they've been used in Norway. So there's a paper on that. But it was a lot of hollow glass spheres. I mean, I just remember seeing some of the pictures of how many they added and how they were moving this stuff around, and it was a lot.
Yeah.
Uh, so cost is something you have to think about along with your impact on fluid properties. But they exist. They've been used in the right application, maybe,
Sure. And when you say right application, is anything, and I mean, obviously it depends and there's context around it, but what would be any idea of like what an ideal situation would be for that, or something that maybe you've come across?
I mean, that Norway case study is probably the most apparent just because it's so expensive to drill there, right? So your spread costs are so high that, anytime you have where you're drilling, your rig operating costs are high no matter what. Anything that can reduce the days drilling or risk or challenges, your mud bill sort of matters less, right? Because you get that money back. So Norway being such an expensive place to drill, it made a lot of sense there.
Got it.
There's probably some other offshore locations. Um, you know, I think it all sort of depends on where the economics sit, but you probably need a pretty good production well to make this worth your while.
Got it. All right. And then let's talk about air drilling. That's one that's not common down here around our neck of the woods, but up in the Northeast, I know when I was up there, at least, we used it on almost every well. So let's talk about air drilling.
Yes, and we have an episode where we've talked about drilling with foam and like air can be pretty broad.
Yeah.
But there's actually another you can have sort of an internal and outer string. You can inject nitrogen into let's say you're drilling with brine. I did this in West Texas years ago. The trick there is to make connections. Usually you have to turn it off so you're static and you lose and then turn it back on because you're just basically injecting gas into the hydrostatic column.
Right.
But in the Northeast, when we're drilling just surface holes, uh, the big thing here is you're not using air necessarily. You're probably using nitrogen because air is flammable, and it can be corrosive. So a lot of times it's nitrogen, which they're pulling out of the air. But you've got all these compressors, so you need a big yard.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of surface equipment. The other thing is a lot of it is top holes. The reason they can do it in the Northeast is their water table is so much lower. I mean, think about, how hilly it is and everything. Yeah. So, with that, if you encounter water, you're going to have to mud up. But the other thing is when we talk about drilling shallow, especially you think about coal country, you've got a lot of shallow gas hazards.
Mm-hmm.
So like downhole fires and stuff are a real risk, because you're drilling with air or nitrogen. And so you encounter that gas, it ignites, it can really damage your downhole equipment. But it drills fast. It gets you through a lot of troublesome areas. And so it's a fairly standard practice up there. I mean, not 100%, but like most people will do that.
Yeah.
For all the way down to their intermediate, and then, set pipe and load oil-based mud and come back with a big rig later and drill the production section.
Yeah. They'll go as deep as they go until they get flow or they reach their casing point.
Yeah.
So, and then what about another one? This is kind of a debatable one. If depends who you talk to, but what about Afrons?
So, the reason that I wouldn't include Afrons in a low density mud is because, I mean, you see people market it as a low density fluid, and when you take a surface mud weight uncompressed, you might have 7 pounds per gallon. But under pressure, those bubbles get smaller, and so by unit volume, they get smaller and smaller. And so if your TVD is below about 8,000 feet, you might get a couple of tenths, but there's plenty of literature out there showing it doesn't really materially reduce your mud weight. And that's not really what they're designed. They're designed more as those bubbles are supposed to go into like thief zones and expand and sort of form a seal. So, you're not actually getting a reduction in hydrostatic pressure. And so you're not getting very much on the hydrostatic pressure reduction. So it's not necessarily a lightweight fluid per se. It has a lot of bubbles in it, but this is the reason that, a lot of the air drilling applications and where you're injecting gas is you have to continually add it.
Mhm.
So that's why I wouldn't include it on the list, but, it starts out with bubbles.
Right. Perfect. I mean, again, that covers a lot of it. I'm trying to think of any maybe off the wall questions that might come up when it comes to reducing density, but I think we've covered most of it. On the water side, I guess really the only thing you like, obviously water being 8.3 pounds per gallon. To lighten up water, you would at that point either inject foam or a lighter oil. That'd be about it, right? On the water-based mud side.
Yeah, there's really not too much else that would probably make a lot of sense.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, there's some lighter stuff. The problem is anything that's like a hydrocarbon, whatever, is eventually you start getting into like flammable stuff. Like you wouldn't use it at a rig site.
Nah, no bueno.
No.
Okay. Well, with that said, Matt, any sort of kind of wrapping it up, any closing last words in?
I guess, this is one of those, if we could simplify, like all of these have traps, right? Keep in mind, just getting a low density doesn't include maintaining a low density due to solids and other things.
Sure.
And then you're probably like, because you're trying to avoid the risk of losses, so does increasing your per barrel cost of mud, does it offset the losses you may encounter? Sometimes the answer is yes. A lot of times it's no. So that's just worth thinking about.
Yeah.
And that's probably why some of these you may not have heard of or you may not have encountered, is because them existing hasn't made them economic.
Yep. Makes sense. And with that being said, everyone, if you have any other questions, thoughts, or ideas here, or maybe you've used a unique system or something that we didn't mention, let us know. And with that said, please give us a good review. Connect with us on LinkedIn if you have any questions, or you can reach us at the Flowline podcast at aesfluids.com. Be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel. We have more and more content coming out on that front. And until next week, folks, be safe. Take care.
Thanks for listening. Please tune in next week for another exciting episode of the Flowline. And remember, may your returns always be full and your trips always smooth. Views expressed in this program belong to participants and not their employees. The program is for informational purposes only and cannot take the place of seeking professional advice. Copyright AES Drilling Fluids.